Hey, David. Thanks for joining me on the Coffee and Pens podcast.
Cal, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be invited.
It's my pleasure. I read in your books that you moved to Medellin a couple of years ago to South America. That's where I live as well. So you speak Spanish at night and English during the day. That's my reality as well. How does that affect you in your writing?
How does it affect my well? So yeah, I moved here. It's more than 5 years ago now. It's like 5.5 years ago. And so one of the interesting features that I found as I moved here to double down on writing and to basically transform myself into a writer, one of the interesting features that I didn't necessarily anticipate was that, yeah, people speak Spanish here. That's obvious, but it kind of has a benefit to it in that, during the day, I'm like writing in English. My partner doesn't speak English. She speaks Spanish. She's Colombian. And so in the evening, I'm like thinking in Spanish, or a lot of the day, I'm thinking in a completely different language. And that is a good, I think, sort of disconnect. You sort of get stuck in this world of words, and you get this intuitive connection with words in a language, and then you kind of have to like pull yourself out to where you're having to think quite deliberately about what word it is that you're looking for. And I find it to be like a nice disconnect. But there's also a lot of other interesting things that you realize as somebody who works with words when you come across things that either translate in an oddly accurate way from one language to another, or an oddly inaccurate way. So like one of my personal favorites with Spanish is that, okay, in Spanish, to fast, meaning to not eat food, is to ayunar, and to have breakfast is to desayunar. So you're unfasting. And like, oh, that sounds like funny and sort of oddly simplistic in a way. But then you realize that it's the same way in English, that to fast is fast, and to have breakfast is to break fast, is breakfast. So there's all sorts of fun things like that I discover as well.
Yeah, that's so relatable. I think I had the same realization about 2 years ago. So I was speaking Spanish for about 7, 8 years then when I realized, hey, wait a minute, this ayunar means to break, like to stop your fast. And then I thought, hey, in English
Right.
it's the same, and I had never thought about this before.
However, it doesn't work with resting. So to to get tired is to cansar, and to untired yourself is to rest, is to descansar.
Yeah.
So you are untiring yourself, and I don't know of a parallel in the English language. So whenever I come across one of these things, I just sort of try to keep a note of it and put it into some sort of running list. Like I'm sure I've got a note somewhere that has like a lot of other sort of fascinating things, but that's one of the more interesting ones to me.
Yeah, it's a funny one. You mentioned a few times in your book, actually, that, or in your books, that Medellin is the city of the eternal spring. I lived in Cochabamba, Bolivia, up till last year, and that's also the city of eternal spring. I think there are quite a lot of.
There's a bunch of them, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a Wikipedia page and everything.
Really, I should have a look. And then you mentioned near the end of the book, and I think that's the most relatable thing I've read personally, that you actually had to go to the bank like a caveman when you need to get some admin done. And like, coming from Europe, or you from the United States, that was so strange that I actually had to go to the bank to pay my electricity bills, my water bills, my gas bills.
Yeah, I have to go to the bank to pay my rent. And a lot of that's cultural. A lot of it's also just the way that my particular landlord works, which, by the way, it was very difficult as a foreigner to get an apartment even here. And but I was fortunately found an owner of an apartment and rented directly from him. But it was like I had to hang out with the guy for like a couple days and have lunch with him a few times and like spend hours with this person to sort of build that trust. And then on top of it, it's just he doesn't like bank transactions, and he banks in a different bank. So when I pay my rent, what I usually do is there's this section of the mall that I go to that has like all the banks in this one hallway, and it's kind of secure that way because it's a closed area and there's security guards there and everything. And so I go and take out, 10 million pesos, like several months worth of rent, and just in cash, and I just stow it in my backpack, and then I like walk across this hallway and to a different bank and give them big stacks of money and deposit it, and that's how I pay my rent.
Yeah, that's funny and so relatable. My first landlord was this old guy. He would come get rent each month for his sister. Actually, he was the owner of the apartment, and we didn't even have to deposit it. He would come to our apartment to just collect it himself and write down the number of the dollars. So I would pay in dollars.
Okay, see, I would like that even less because I would have to not only go to the bank to get the cash, I'd have to like have the schedule. Oh, he's going to stop by, and he'll probably want to chit chat or something like that. I prefer being able to just deposit it in the bank like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So living in Colombia, which was one of the biggest coffee production countries in the world, I suppose, and are well known for its coffee. I'm not sure if I read that you drink coffee, but do you drink coffee, and what's your favorite?
This is wow. This is I shouldn't even be admitting this. I don't drink coffee. I never have. Well, okay. I did recently start trying uh like some decaf here and there, for the antioxidants or whatever. I'm just really sensitive to caffeine. If I even like green tea, I might drink a little bit of green tea every once in several months if I like really kind of want an extra sort of mental edge for a short period of time. Um, but then I'll likely feel a little anxious. My heart might race a little bit. I might get a little short of breath. I might start like getting slightly paranoid or something. Not just like that day, but maybe like the next day or days after, a couple days afterwards. And so once I sort of made that connection, I mean, I never really drank coffee to begin with, but once I made that, I used to drink tea quite a bit. Once I made that connection, I stopped drinking tea as well. So now I'm just like all herbal teas. Um, However, I do once in a while drink coca leaf tea, which is not legal in the United States. I think the only company that's allowed to even import the leaves is Coca-Cola, which I learned at the Coca Leaf Museum in Cusco, Peru. And the woman there told me like, oh, it's totally true. Like, no, nobody knows this. And then I was saying that to somebody and he was like, oh, that's interesting because I used to know guys in the drug business and they would hijack Coca-Cola trucks in the United States, apparently, which is okay. Don't even ask me how I was talking to this person, but so that was kind of interesting. So coca leaf tea apparently has whatever is in cocaine, but like at like thousandths of you know, and I'm sure it's also has plenty of other compounds in it as well. But it's a nice, doesn't make me jittery, perks me up just a tiny bit, and it's kind of cool to consume this harmless beverage that is for whatever reason not legal in the United States.
Yeah, that's so funny. I went to the Coca Museum just 2 or 3 weeks ago,
Oh
and
wow,
I remember
it's
seeing,
good.
yeah, and there was this. It was a really funny thing that they had 4 or 5 pictures up from famous cocaine users. So there was a picture of Maradona, and I think there was Amy Winehouse, and there were like a few more famous people that
Oh wow, I didn't
were
remember
well
seeing
known
that.
because of their drug abuse. So that was funny.
That's
But
an interesting choice.
yeah, and I remember seeing this what you said about Coca-Cola importing coca leaves.
Hmm.
And because of something I was writing this morning, I looked up like the history of Coca-Cola, and there it said that they stopped using coca leaves in their productions like 120 years ago. So why are they
Yeah,
still importing it?
yeah. Well, oh, well, I think that it was, if I recall correctly, this is almost exactly 3 years ago that I went to the Coca Leaf Museum. Yeah, they don't use the compound or the sort of active ingredient in Coca Cola anymore, but it's used for the flavoring, or at least that's what they're claiming.
Oh, okay, okay.
The powerful company, who knows what sort of like under the table sort of deal they have going on to be able to import this leaf and maybe unbeknownst to the American public actually put
Yeah,
a compound in.
who
I don't know.
knows?
I don't want to make conspiracy theories here, but
Yeah.
you never know.
You could get me started on all the gold trade to the US and everything, but actually, I want to talk to you about books.
All right.
And you have a section on your website, which I'm definitely going to link to, in which you discuss your tools. But the tool I'm most interested in is the Alpha Smart. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, I love the Alpha Smart. What a wonderful device. The Alpha Smart is like a little. It's a portable word processor. It's basically a keyboard. It has a small screen on it, and there's 12 files that you can store things in, and they're just all individual buttons on that keyboard. And you can just pick it up and turn it on and type. And you can see maybe 4 or 5 lines of type on it. And it is a really wonderful device for just capturing some thoughts. And people get very confused about that. They want to know, well, how does it doesn't sync to Dropbox, it doesn't sync to Google Docs or whatever, it doesn't, what's the use of this device? And that's why the device is useful, is it doesn't sync to all those things. Because I think a lot of people just don't realize that the process of writing is not always sitting down and writing one word after another and having it come out perfectly. And often one of the biggest enemies to us getting writing done is the tools that we're using themselves. And so the wonderful thing about the AlphaSmart is just for writing. It's in fact not so good for editing. You can edit on it. You wouldn't want to. It's painful. And so that's one thing that like helps keep you moving so that you are writing. And there is a little habit that I do every morning. I keep my AlphaSmart in my nightstand. And first thing in the morning when I wake up, I sleep with a mask on. Before I even open my eyes, I just sort of like grope my way into the nightstand and pull out the AlphaSmart, turn it on, and type until I feel like I've typed at least 100 words. And then I'll verify, and sometimes I'm at 98 words or something like that. But most of the time, I end up writing a lot more than that. I end up writing, 500 words or something. And it's just anything that's on my mind, a dream that I had, something that I'm thinking about, anything. And even if if I'm writing about one thing and I start thinking about another thing, I'll just change the subject mid-sentence. And it's a really wonderful expressive tool. And actually, once I'm done, most of the time I just delete everything that I just wrote. Because it's not so much about producing the words, it's about exercising those connections in your mind. And to the point that sometimes the AlphaSmart, like right now, I'm out of batteries. So I was writing on it this morning, and it's just like writing. If you can touch type when you're typing on a keyboard, it's just like writing. Those connections are still happening in your mind, even if you aren't saving it in that moment. And it's wonderful. And one of the things that's great about it not having internet, it's a very private thing. You can write things that you might not normally put down because you'd be worried somebody might read it, or things that you're not even sure that you believe or think, and you can exercise all that stuff. And it's really wonderful. I've also taken to writing with a typewriter lately as well. So I love these sort of single use devices for writing that don't distract you and that don't get in the way of you writing.
Yeah, from what I've noticed in your books is that you tend to look always for new ways to write without distractions. So you say that, for example, you write a lot with your iPad and a separate keyboard. And
yes.
Then I also read that you're on your tools page, you said that you're a big fan of Scrivener. Is that something that you use on your iPad?
Yeah, Scrivener is available for both desktop and iPad. And actually, now that you mention that, maybe I should update that list, because I haven't been using Scrivener so much lately. I did use it for this latest book, Mind Management, Not Time Management. But lately, I've just become really Scrivener has a lot of nice tools that I think that screenwriters and especially fiction writers use to sort of help them storyboard. And it has formatting. So it has like kind of all those bells and whistles that you can use to make something look nice. But lately, I've just been really obsessed with plain text and especially Markdown writing, which is just, if you want to make a header, you just type a pound sign and then type whatever the header is, and like that formats it. Sort of human readable, but various programs can read it and give formatting to it. And so I've been really interested in just plain text lately. And so I've been using a lot of, I do write on my iPad a lot. I love that it's pretty low distraction. There's sort of, it's hard to do a lot more than write on it when you have a keyboard hooked up to it. And so I've been using OneWriter for iOS, which is just a very plain text editor. I've been using that a lot. And lately I've also been using Ulysses quite a bit, which is also pretty much plain text, but it has a few more features to it. One that I like the most is its ability to export to WordPress. So I can type in Markdown. I don't have to go into WordPress and say, oh, this is an H3 and this is an H1 or whatever. It supposedly has keyboard shortcuts, but I've never been able to get them to work. And I can add the images and everything, and it uploads all of it to WordPress. And then, my team, for my podcast, for example, my team then kind of picks it up and puts in the podcast stuff and publishes it that way. And so that way I'm always just working with the most basic raw materials of writing, which is plain text. So I'm a big fan of those plain text tools as well.
All right. Yeah, I've noticed that with many authors so far that they prefer these markdown tools, and what they have in common so far is that they are either designers or programmers in the past. So I think you've been a designer yourself, and you wrote your first book about it, I guess.
Yeah,
Design for Hackers was your first book, is that right?
that Design for Hackers was my first book, and I was a web designer doing a lot of front end development as well at the same time, a little bit of back end development as well. So yeah, got some programming in my DNA.
All right. And this book, you got a book deal for this book, right?
For Design for Hackers, I did. Yeah, that was a published book through a traditional publisher through Wiley, and they're the ones who really gave me the confidence and gave me an advance to go ahead and write that first book. I don't think that I would have had the guts to do it, at least not as soon for that first one. But since then, I've been self-published.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing?
Yeah, sure. Um, I got really lucky with Design for Hackers, to be honest. I wrote a blog post, and then I had written some blog posts, but then I kind of wrote one that I put a lot of effort into, and it's an attempt to get a speaking slot at South by Southwest, which is a really big tech conference, and that failed. But in the process, a couple publishers saw it and reached out to me and said, "Hey, this looks like a good book idea." So I ended up working with Wiley on that, and it was a pretty quick process. So quick that I ended up talking to some agents along the way, and so agents help you interface with a publisher, because publishing there's only so many publishers really, and these agents kind of already have relationships with the editors at these publishing houses who sort of choose these books and make the deals and stuff. And supposedly an agent will negotiate a better deal for you, advocate for you, kind of know what sort of tricks maybe to look out for in the contracts and stuff that might not be so much in your favor. And then in the process, you'll supposedly make more money, and then they'll take a cut of that. So I did talk to some agents in the process there. And I remember talking to actually Tim Ferriss's agent. He was nice enough to speak to me on the phone, and he was like, "Wow, this is happening so fast." He was asking me about the process, and just like, "Wow, okay, this is happening very fast." So it was a very, I think it was an unusual sort of process. And I made an outline, and my acquisitions editor, who had reached out to me, pitched it internally. And I think I didn't have to make an incredible proposal to really win them over. It was sort of already a foregone conclusion. And so I did that, and got an advance through that, and had this series of deadlines, and an editor, who was really more of a project manager of, hit these, you have to have 25% done by this date, 50% done by that date, and we'll pay you this much on these dates, etc. And in the contract it says, well, if you miss any of these dates, we can just say, hey, this is done, give us all the money back, etc. So lots of pressure. It was a 6-month writing timeline, and that I negotiated up from a 4.5-month writing timeline that they had originally proposed, which would have been a nightmare. I mean, because 6 months was a nightmare. I sort of just was at this point in my life where I had set up things for something like this to happen, and kind of had the space clear, and was desperate and hungry enough for success that I was willing to just lock myself in my apartment and lock myself out of every other aspect of my life, pretty much social life, dating, etc., and just bear down for 6 months and suffer my way through writing that first book. Now, when I finally survived that process and then was ready to write a book again, I decided, well, I want to do the traditional publishing thing again, and that's where I started to do it sort of the way you're supposed to do it. And I didn't go to Wiley with my book idea, which was it's not even a book that necessarily exists right now, and because it wasn't really the right fit for them, I don't think. And so I sort of went about it the way you're sort of supposed to go about traditional publishing, which is you sign up for a thing called Publishers Marketplace, and you start to look at books in your genre that are similar, and you try to figure out who's the agent for this book. And then you can look on Publishers Marketplace and see all the deals coming in. and see who was the agent on this, who was the editor, who was the publishing house, etc. And start to get a feel for like who are the agents. Really is what you're looking for in that case. You're looking who are the agents who would be interested in this book idea, who would have the relationships, and who have successfully gotten books like this published before, that you would want to get in contact with. And then it's a matter of you create a book proposal where you're sort of outlining the whole book, and you kind of have to already know everything that's in the whole book. So in a way, you kind of have to write the whole book already, because you have to know, like, okay, in this chapter, I'm going to talk about this using this example and that example, etc. And so I suffered my way through this process and wrote, I think, 2 different like 60-page proposals for books with marketing plans, etc., and queried agents, which is just you write a short letter. And I got responses from them, which I think was helped along by the fact that I had already written a book that had sold pretty well. And but it was lukewarm. I didn't get sort of what I had heard from some friends of mine who maybe have larger platforms who were like, oh yeah, such and such agent, help me out with this proposal. We sort of worked together on it, and that's how we pitched it. And so I wasn't getting that kind of reaction. And the more that I did it, the more it felt uncomfortable for me. The more that I felt like I had to kind of pretend to be somebody that I wasn't, to tell them what they wanted to hear. As I looked at more and more proposals, and I looked at more and more of the books that are published by traditional publishers, the more I realized that there were sort of these traditional authority triggers that they were looking out for. They're like, they want to see, oh, you're a professor at an Ivy League university, or you're a CEO at a Fortune 500 company, or you have this consultancy that consults with Fortune 500 companies or something. And those weren't things that I wanted. I wasn't that, and I didn't want to be that. And so the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that the proposal writing process was not aligned with how I like to write. I like to write to discover, sort of. The proposal writing process is sort of a top down. I already know this stuff, and I'm going to tell you about it. Whereas I like to write more of a bottom up approach of I've got some questions in my mind, and I'm going to try to answer them, and I'm going to work on this and write, and the book will emerge from that process. And so I remember on episode 77 of my podcast, speaking with Seth Godin, and I was really milling about, as he would say, about how I'm just not getting this traditional publishing deal that I was trying to get. And he sort of snapped me into shape, said, hey, you're always going to be the head of marketing for your book. So how do you learn that? You learn that by just publishing a book a week, and learning how to get people to sign up for a website, and learning how to put the right keywords in your Kindle book or whatever. And so you learn by doing. And really, no traditional publisher is gonna want you, or not going to give you a good deal unless they know you're going to sell books. And if they know you're going to sell books, you don't actually need them in the first place. But if you can get a 6-figure book deal, go ahead and take it. But otherwise, just go and do it. And so that was, I think, the moment that I really realized that I was going to self-publish. And so I published The Heart to Start very quickly, and naturally was able to write that book and got that out in 2017. And since then, I've also taken some of Seth's advice and written a lot of short reads. So How to Write a Book. There's various other ones, like one on cryptocurrency called Steemit, one on a font, the Papyrus font. We've got one on the Digital Zettelkasten. That's a system that I use for keeping notes and stuff. That's doing very, very well. And then on top of it, I've also written another book, Mind Management, Not Time Management. So I've got like 3 full-length books, a whole series of short reads, and I'm quite fiercely and happily independent and self-published now. I love being able to see the data when I do some marketing, and I can see the book's sales that day, rather than say like the most successful marketing campaign that I had for Design for Hackers. I didn't see a paycheck for it until 9 months later, and that was pretty much like when I realized that it was successful in selling books. I can run my own ads. I get 70% of the sales, and I'm also somebody who publishes outside of Amazon, aka being wide. Even though a lot of maybe 90% of my sales come from Amazon, it doesn't make a lot of economic sense for me to publish in other places, but I sort of do it to stay diversified and fight the good fight, I guess, give people some other choices. So I really enjoy being self-published, and I think anybody who's waiting for permission, asking for permission to do this thing that they don't need permission to do, I would really recommend that they give themselves that permission.
So it's a lot of information right there about the difference between traditional versus self-publishing. Thank you for being so elaborate about it and giving plenty of details to make
a whole sea.
Yeah, I think it helps people to make a better decision about whether they want self-publish or find a publisher. You've given a lot of information that was very new to me about how to find a publisher. So that was very interesting.
A lot of it's an ego thing. We want the approval. We want, I guess, so much of Seth Godin's advice from episode 77 resonates with me. Is this idea of like we want reassurance. Like we want somebody to tell us it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But and we want that validation, and there's certainly like a palpable difference sometimes when people find out that you have something traditionally published versus self-published. There's a little more respect from some people or some certain outlets, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I read in one of your books, I guess, that Design for Hackers even managed to outsell, for example, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the first day, it was number 18 on all of Amazon, which is nuts. I don't know. I can't seem to do that today, even when I put a book on sale for $1.99 or something. Yeah. So top 20 on all of his Amazon. It sold a lot of books.
That's impressive.
The first day or few days, especially. So, and yeah, it was above. There was I was above Tim Ferriss and former Vice President Dick Cheney, and many authors that you would never dream to outsell.
That's amazing. That's very impressive. Since you started in self-publishing, that's not something that you managed to achieve again.
No, and I think part of the reason is that when I did that in 2011, I think Amazon's algorithms were a little bit more, they were a little less sophisticated. I think they were sort of just updating every hour based upon the sales velocity. And now they're a little bit more smoothed out so that it's like the sales velocity for that hour, but as sort of mixed in with how well has this book been selling over, I don't know exactly, but I would guess like the previous several hours, the previous few days. And then I think there's also algorithmic cliffs at like 30 days and 90 days, et cetera. So I think their algorithms got more sophisticated. And also it really was sort of a positive black swan, as Taleb would say, where, there was just the hacker news community, which is a really rabid community of developers and entrepreneurs, which has changed a lot since then. They were just all about that book. I was just really riding this wave where they were hungry to learn about design. And not only my blog post that was introducing the book, but also the Amazon link were on the front page of Hacker News all day, which is like one of the most trafficked sort of websites or news aggregators out there. And I don't even think you would see an Amazon link on the front page of there. I recently, when My Management, Not Time Management came out, the Amazon link for it was on the front page for about 3 seconds, and then the editors took it down. They're like, "Oh no, this isn't how. It's not relevant to the community," or something like that. You have commercial pages, which is kind of weird because people share their startups and stuff. But when you put 10 years into writing a book, they have a different feeling about it. I don't know. I think it's actually kind of hypocritical, but there was a sort of perfect storm worked out to make it really go up. And that's kind of what we're doing when we're leveraging media, when we're writing books, when we're doing creative work, is that we can have certain things that we're shooting for. We can have certain plans about how things are going to work out, but then something spontaneous happens, and sometimes those things line up so that something you couldn't possibly have planned for happens.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I've been going a little bit towards the not so beautiful side of writing, with this last question and with the next one as well. So you mentioned the time pressure, and when you were trying to propose for a new book with a publisher that your style didn't really align with what they were looking for. Do you think those were the biggest obstacles, or were there other big obstacles while writing your first book or your first 2 books?
The first 2 books are so different from one another. I'll start with the book writing process, because when I wrote that first book, Design for Hackers, I wasn't a writer. I had written some blog posts, and I sort of had this idea of how writing got done. Was that, if you need to write 50,000 words over the course of 6 months, it's like 250 or 300 words a day. Put that on the calendar, crank out that many words. Well, it doesn't really work that way. What I found was that I would spend 12 hours a day banging my head against the wall and just being in actual physical agony, trying to just write anything. But then every once in a while, I would get this sort of, I would hit this nerve or this vein or something that would just start gushing, and I would hit flow. And in 15 minutes, I would write like an entire chapter worth of writing. So that's actually one of the main things that inspired me to write Mind Management, Not Time Management, was this discovery that, well, it's not so much necessarily about having the time to create things, to write. What's much harder is actually putting yourself in the right state of mind to do that. And that's taken a lot of practice to where now I've pretty much got it down. I've got systems in place where I've got a podcast an essay every 2 weeks on my podcast. I've got a short essay in my Love Mondays email every week. And I sort of have a process set down where I can sit down and write a crappy draft for like 2 minutes and then revisit it a week later. And suddenly it's more clear in my mind, and I can spend another 2 minutes on it, and it's like that much better. And I'm able to do something with just a few minutes spread out across over time, something that would have taken me hours of agony to get right if it were possible at all, if I were just approaching it with a sort of traditional productivity mindset.
So that has really worked for you, splitting it up into the different parts of creativity, as you mentioned in your books. Now, how would you turn this personal approach to writing into 3 actionable tips for someone who's listening if they wanted to write better?
One, I would say lower your standards. Give yourself permission to suck. Like Hemingway said, the first draft of anything is shit. And like really embrace how bad you can make that first. I mean, we're talking like misspellings, changing the subject in the middle of the sentence. Maybe you don't have sentences. Maybe it's sentence fragments. Maybe it's bullet points, and then all of a sudden one of the bullet points turns into a run-on sentence or paragraph. You're putting things in brackets where you're saying like, oh, here's where I would need a really cool example that illustrates this. Like real shit. I mean, just terrible, awful. And don't spend too much time on that. Spend a few minutes on that. And then I would say embrace the power of incubation. Your mind has this passive genius in it that is incredibly powerful that you can't even avoid it. It's something I've noticed living in Colombia and learning Spanish. I've got a ritual with my partner where she and I read one page from a book in our respective languages out loud, and we read it like every day, one page. But then we read that one page like a few different times until it's like we've got it down. And it's really incredible how like the first time you read it out loud, you're stumbling over the words, you can't get it right. And then by the third time, you're just fluidly reading these words that you could not say, and you've only spent like a few minutes on it. Like your mind is incredible. It starts to if you put effort towards any sort of problem, then in the off time, your mind figures it out, especially if you get good sleep and stuff. So take advantage of that, because one of the hardest things about writing is getting yourself to do the writing. And if it's going to be painful, then you'll be even less likely to do it. So when you give yourself permission to suck, and then you let incubation take over, you take a lot of that pain away from the process. Things get easier. Things don't take as much time. And then I guess the third thing, if I were to say a third thing, is that I think there's 3 C's to being a great writer. And one is consistency. Consistency, like, can you write on a regular basis? Like, regardless of whether it's good or not, can you get yourself so that you are writing on a regular schedule? And the second one, I'm trying to actually think of what even the second one is. So you want to be consistent with it, and then you want to. So the third one's craft, definitely. Like that's the last thing that you need to be worrying about is like, am I getting the right words? Okay, the second one's courage, right? Okay. So consistency, courage, craft. So consistency, can you write consistently? Courage, can you have the courage to actually put your writing out there? Like that's a whole other thing in itself that needs to be overcome. And then finally, you're thinking about craft. Like, am I choosing the right words here? How can I better word this so that it's going to have the effect that I want? And work on one of those things at a time. Sort of like how Benjamin Franklin has 13 virtues. He only like worked on thrift, for a week, and then the next week he worked on generosity or whatever. And you can only focus on one thing at a time. So I would say one of the biggest barriers people have to writing is they're trying to do all three of those C's at once. They're trying to build a writing habit, and they're trying to like post things on their blog, and then they're also trying to like make it good.
Perfect. So summed up, your 3 tips are: first, don't be afraid to write shit, Hemingway's words. So secondly,
Permission to suck.
All right. And so leave time for incubation afterwards. So enough time to that you're writing Sid, as Stephen King would say, put it in a drawer and then come back.
I'd say like, employ your passive genius is how I would really sum it up. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then the third one is just don't want it all at the same time. Work on consistency, courage, and craft at different times, one by one.
Right.
Then from your book, The Heart to Start, there were 2 things that I've taken away. So I only finished reading a couple of days ago, but there are 2 things that I'm trying to implement in my life. One is motivational judo, which you already talked about a little bit when we were talking about the Alpha Smart. And the other one, I can't remember what you named it again, but just the idea that every single moment you can make a little bit of progress. So I used to procrastinate quite a bit. I just find myself scrolling Twitter in those like 5 minutes between leaving my work and leaving the house. So for example, after dinner, like we need to go in 10 minutes, not enough time to get started on work. Well, that's wrong. You can start in 10 minutes and you can make a little bit of progress. So those have been my biggest lessons.
That last one I call inflating the investment, which is just that we think that we only have like a couple minutes while we're waiting in the dentist waiting room or something. And that's not enough time to do anything of substance. So we'll just open up social media. Well, I mean, you can sort of like, I've heard Walter Isaacson say this. He's written all these amazing biographies of like Benjamin Franklin and Steve Jobs and Leonardo da Vinci, that he'll like, if he's sitting in an airport, he'll open up his phone and, start writing. And that's one of these things where sort of lowering your bar for quality can help overcome that tendency to procrastinate. Is that like, if you just open up a little document and you write some like crappy bullet points, well, that's progress. That can be useful. You can actually do something with that. And it's also one of the things that makes the Zettelkasten really useful, which is just a series of having a bunch of different notes of things that you've read, because you can quickly open it up and it's almost like using Twitter, but it's all the most interesting, useful things that you've collected that you're reviewing. And it's another great way to make use of those little pockets of time.
How do you actively use your Zettelkasten? I mean, it's probably in your book. I have a huge collection of notes, highlights, quotes, and I find it so hard to just say, okay, I'm going to open it up right now and read a couple of them.
Well, I mean, one thing that I like to do, like if I'm waiting for some friends to show up to a restaurant or something, I'll often have just markdown highlights from a book exported, and I'll just sort of review those, and I'm like highlighting the highlights. Tiago Forte calls it progressive summarization. So I'm like highlighting the highlights to sort of like identify what are the most interesting parts of this. And that's one of those things you can just sit there and do fidgeting around. It's sort of like, the important thing I think is finding the low effort, low commitment activities that you can do that only take a second to get into, and that if you get interrupted, you can quickly just make a little quick placeholder there and pick up with it later. It can be overwhelming to open up your entire Zettelkasten just on your phone while you're waiting somewhere.
Thank you. And let's finish with my favorite question. What's your secret?
What's my secret? I don't know. Secret to what?
To writing.
I think my secret to writing is that I never thought of myself as a writer.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I guess that helps with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's just sort of accidentally happened. And I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves. They feel like they go to an MFA program or something to get the permission to put their words out there. But everybody writes. Some of us write better than others. The only way you can get good at it is by doing it.